Hi there, and welcome, folks, to another episode of Space Talks with Z, hosted by the America's Future Series. Thank you very much. And thanks to our sponsor, Millennium Space Systems, and others who make this possible. Today with us, we have a special guest, Dan Mosqueda, currently Director of Business Development for Air Force and Space Force at Riverside Research Organization. And, thank you very much, Dan, for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Zaheer. I really appreciate it, and we'll always look forward to talking to you, and I appreciate your sponsors too. That is very important to make this sort of thing possible.
Thanks, Dan. Now, I'm going to briefly introduce Dan. He has had a very interesting career. Started at within ROTC at University of Michigan of what was a very, very interesting major, Russian and East European studies. So, a little bit of a interesting politics there, geared towards NATO, I imagine. Which it was a different world back then, right? But since then has become deeply involved in defense and aerospace in a variety of different ways. Served in the United States Air Force as a lieutenant colonel, and then moved into the private sector, where he has worked to help provide solutions in the national interest to the government and the national enterprise with a variety of different companies. And, Dan, you've had a very interesting path, interesting education, then time in the service, and then moving into the private sector. So it's a really a long and winding road. Perhaps we could kick off by asking you to, describe it a little bit in your own words, what interested you, how you got from point A to point B to point P, where we are now, supporting the United States Space Force, from Riverside Research.
So yeah, it's funny because it actually started my interest in the Air Force and space, frankly, from the $6 Million Man. Loved Steve Austin and all the kind of cool things that he did. So, and then there was kind of a mix also of some people in my life who were had been in the military, and I thought that looked interesting. And so when time came to go to college, I wanted to be in the Air Force, and ended up at the University of Michigan. And I wasn't really at that point, the kind of person who was destined to be a great engineer. And they asked me, what did I want to study? And I said, well, I have no idea. Well, I've always had interest in kind of international affairs and that sort of thing, and history. So the guy was like, well, how about you study Russian? And I said, okay, sure, sounds good to me. And at the time, I spoke Spanish pretty well, a little bit of French. So I chose Russian and East European studies. And honestly, it was fascinating. And in the wisdom of the United States Air Force at the time when I graduated, they decided that I needed to be an ICBM launch officer, not an intelligence officer. But the goodness behind that was that ICBMs shifted from Strategic Air Command to Air Combat Command, and then to Air Force Space Command. So because of that, it put me into the space and missiles career field, which allowed some bouncing back and forth between what I would call a more operational weapons system like Minuteman III ICBM to certainly operational weapons systems in terms of what Space Command was responsible for, but maybe just a little bit different, but nonetheless super interesting. And I've certainly have enjoyed my time over the years. And towards the end of my career, I met Dr. Fred Tarantino, who was the CEO of the University Research Association, and he asked me what was I going to do when I got out. He was visiting me and my boss at Air Force Space Command headquarters at the time, and I said, "Well, I'm not really sure." And he offered me a job at USRA, and of course that's how we met and worked there for a pretty good long time, and really started to enjoy business development. And then that led me to a few other companies, and now I'm at Riverside Research Institute, which back in the day was part of Columbia University in Manhattan, and of course now is a completely independent, not-for-profit R&D company focused solely on the U.S. government and its allies for the work that we do.
Thank you for that, Dan. It's really interesting because Fred and his deputy Helen Hall recruited me to USRA from the Nevada test site, and so you worked on the delivery vehicle of the very special package that I helped engineer different versions of. Yes. One thing that is really interesting, and I think your career in many ways shows that progression, is the movement of space from the realm of very, very deep defense and government to kind of, hey, research, hey, now commercial. And what's interesting is, and we'll get into this a little later in more detail, but as part of your work, you're helping the Spaceworks leverage commercial technologies and assets. Can you perhaps discuss what you've seen in your career in that progression from kind of being very, very deep government, super niche, to kind of blossoming as an industry that's now not just telecom and government, but everything else?
Sure. In fact, when I was at Air Force Space Command, about the time that before I met Fred, but not too long before meeting Fred, I was working with Dr. Doug Beeson, who at the time was the chief scientist at Air Force Space Command, and in his past had been at AFRL at Kirtland and many other assignments. Great scientist and thinker and leader, and now actually science fiction author. But we started seeing this move towards new space and this burgeoning community of commercial space entrepreneurs. In fact, I remember speaking with folks at Virgin Galactic well before Virgin Orbit ever existed, and asking them, "Hey, had you ever thought about, making these vehicles available for some sort of R&D?" And of course, they were like, "Yes. In fact, we have plans to really go in that direction." And of course, they haven't. In fact, their Virgin Orbit, Vox, for their U.S. subsidiary, is substantially further ahead than the initial plans for Virgin Galactic. And they have successfully put small satellites on orbit, and I think they're going to be a great thing. And so, certainly over those years, getting opportunities to work with, guys like Pete Worden and several others, we really started to see this value in new space, because while they may not have the exquisite capabilities of a lot of things, say up at GEO or even in LEO, what they do have is that element of resilience and the affordability factor, when we look at, say, somebody like Planet, right, where every couple of years you can just replace your sensors, and so you're never stuck with making a decision that is going to live with you for the next 2 decades in the case of so that really got me very even more so interested in this, and of course at USRA and later at a couple other firms where I've worked, we really started to see things blossom over time, and it's amazing, where we are. You look at somebody like Dan Faber, Jeremy Scheel at Orbit Fab, for example. They've been doing fantastic. You look at some of the launch providers, obviously, SpaceX and Blue Origin, but also Firefly, or even small companies like Vault, or other folks that are flying birds, like struggling with the names, with Spire and other companies like Astro, yeah, exactly. Is it Hawkeye 360? Am I getting that right?
Is that the Black Sky satellite? There's so many now. I feel like there's another one that's announced every week.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and certainly for Black Sky, Peter, of course, I knew him way back when they were just standing up ORS, operationally responsive space, which, was another great demonstration of, hey, we don't need 10 years to develop the requirements. We can build this thing, throw it up into space. I mean, obviously needs, there's a lot more to it than that, but in 3 years we had a really useful tool for the warfighter over CENTCOM. So and I think we're going to continue to see more of this, and maybe now sometimes to the detriment at this point of space traffic management and space domain awareness, but you have to take, I guess, the good with the bad.
I mean, there's a question. I want to move into another area, but you made a really interesting point in that when you can access things at this scale and you can create basically expendable space assets, that's a new paradigm. Expendable, right? Because they were always expendable at some level, but it was 2 decades, as you said. Right now, 2 years. So what that means is that the technical readiness level of every component and the risk you can accept in mission assurance, maybe not safety, but at least in mission assurance, is far higher, which theoretically means you can put up far more cutting edge technology. And if it doesn't work, you do another launch next month.
Yeah, when I worked for Brigadier General Woody Haywood, one of the things when we were working through the innovation strategy for Air Force Space Command at the time, along with Colonel Todd Parks, Lieutenant Colonel Lane Gilchrist, at the time Major Tom Jost, and some others, Woody made it pretty clear that at some point we're going to say, hey, I'll take 80% or even 60% of the capability if it's 20% of the cost, and I can find that missing capability somewhere else, and also be able to get something up quickly and meet the mission needs now versus, again, a decade down the road where you're struggling at how do I insert new technology, on-ramp it and off-ramp old technology as you go through without, busting the budget completely, or even in some cases, you just end up with an obsolete piece of kit that you at that point you have to launch because you spent all this money, but it may not be the most useful tool to have in your quiver.
So So, as this has evolved, you yourself have kind of worked in the trifecta in this space. You've worked for, obviously, you were an Air Force officer, so you were in the government. Um, you've worked at a company, you've worked at Leidos and others that are for profit. But now you're at, and you've worked at now a couple of nonprofits that are aligned to the national interest in space. So I'd be interested in your perspective about how that kind of triangle of public-private partnership and nonprofit, right? Public-private and nonprofit partnership works, and particularly given your experience, the place that an organization like Riverside Research has in that ecosystem.
Well, I think what's interesting, between the work that I did at both USRA, at USRA, SRI International, and now Riverside Research, but then with Leidos in between, what I've seen is that a company like Leidos or any of the larger companies, they have a really great ability to operate at scale, and but also with some agility, truth be told. But they can't necessarily do as much dedicated IRAD kind of work, independent or internal research and development projects that not-for-profit can, because at a not-for-profit, we're not responsible to our shareholders. Instead, we're responsible to our stakeholders. So we can choose to take excess revenue and pour those resources into the apparent and clear problems that we see in NOAA because of our relationship with our various government customers, and start chipping away at those problems, and then take them to the government without really much expectation of a large immediate ROI. The ROI for us is the fact that we're contributing to the national security. And frankly, it even goes the same if we're working with a partner like Leidos or GDMS or Lockheed Martin, those sort of companies where, we can bring something to them that would be a little bit more difficult for them to do. But on the other hand, we don't have necessarily that ability to scale stuff and to integrate it into larger systems like they can. So, and I would say the same really kind of goes for a lot of our small new space up and coming firms. And I mentioned Orbit Fab earlier, and they're a great example where they're working with Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman and the government. And so there's a good synergistic fit for either a firm like Riverside or USRA or SRI or SRC, Southwest Research Institute, those kinds of companies, or new space companies like Orbit Fab, like Vault that I mentioned earlier, or any number of other ones that you and I know and see at the various events and conferences that we go to.
Thanks. So focusing on our Riverside Research for a minute, can you share some of the exciting things that are going on that you're seeing being done at that particular nonprofit, and what you see the role that Riverside and perhaps some of these organizations in general can play, particularly with the United States Space Force, as they are figuring out their strategy for engaging the ecosystem as they grow out of Space Command and the Air Force into their a wholly formed entity, which is still being stood up in so many ways.
Right. So a good example that we're working on right now is we've been supporting the Air Force and now the Space Force on Cobra radar, which has been around for a long time. And, you know, we're able to take a lot of our expertise, and our radar expertise goes back to the early days at Columbia University, to help continue to modernize and upgrade that site with the government. There are other contractors that actually do a lot of the what we would call performing on it, but what we do is we're looking at it as subject matter experts and helping the government understand where they could go, and you know, really working with them as a partner. That's an example. But other examples might be some of the work that we're doing in trusted and resilient systems, where we're looking at some really tough problems, side channel attacks, things like that. How do we protect ourselves? How does the government protect itself and its contractors protect themselves when they're doing a lot of AI/ML work right now? Because while AI/ML is awesome, there are some vulnerabilities in there. So it's working on that. It's making sure that data has good provenance, that it's usable. And then I think really another great thing that we just rolled out publicly at GeoInt about a week ago is our Commercial Innovation Center. So in that case, what we're essentially doing is we have set up this center where any small firm or even individual with an interest could come in and have sort of a sandbox and a platform to develop their ideas and get access to data that they would never have access to otherwise. Now, it's all unclassified, but they're able to go through and build this out, and then it allows the government and even other participants to look at that and understand where it might fit in the whole ecosystem. Because certainly as a small firm, you may or may not have an understanding of kind of the bigger picture, right? But we feel like the CIC is going to be very important and provide a real service to both the commercial world and to the government. And we have a lot of really great partners that they're sharing their data, they're making their platforms available, and there is of course, if anyone out there is interested in learning about it, you can go to riversideresearch.org, and it's pretty easy to find information on there right now about the Commercial Innovation Center. And that is run by Dr. Ann Carbonell, who is an amazing scientist. And she also was in the Air Force and then later served as an SES, as a civil servant. And now she is doing fantastic things with Riverside Research, but really on behalf of the National Security Space Enterprise.
Well, that's amazing. So I love the idea. It's kind of a nonprofit's version of a data incubator.
Yes.
Yeah, so, really, you know, go on. Go on, please.
Well, it really is. I mean, that's the whole point. Is it's a place where companies can, you know, like I said, come in and they can take things out, take their ideas and exercise them without having to invest in a lot of the platform that you would need. And also, you know, a lot of they don't have to worry about a lot of the cybersecurity aspects of things, because we're building all of that in. to it. Plus, it's in a sandbox, so it's safe. It's not, you know, if it moved to where it was going to be operational, then
Right, right.
you know, and they would be in a good position to move to that next step.
So that's interesting because it sounds like people who come in and do interesting things there can move directly into providing solutions, or could possibly also easily pivot to like an AFWorks, space, or now we've got Spaceworks that just launched.
Yep.
You know,
Yes.
and we're going to touch on some of your work with Space Force in a minute here, especially the Space Force Association. But for those in our audience who don't know, AFWorks, Air Force Works is, and Spaceworks now are the kind of directed venture capital and seed fund, if you would, for the Air Force and Space Force. They've grown out of the very successful small business innovation research and the tech transfer programs, SBIR and STTR, that have been run across many agencies, but extremely successfully out of the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy. Done a lot of great things, provided a lot of amazing technology to maintain the national edge in technology and science and research. How do you see companies growing out of the commercial innovation center? Dan, I mean, this is a really unique thing Riverside Research is doing. I don't know of any other profit, not Aura, not SRI, not USRA, that's doing this.
Right. It is unique. And I would say there are some similar but not exact efforts at like Catalyst Campus, but this is much more narrow in its
Catalyst is a little more traditional incubator. Yeah.
Correct. Right. This is more focused on, I've got an idea that I want to do with all of this data that is out there from commercial data providers, and a combination of, you know, government data as well. So let's see, getting back to AFWorks, Spaceworks, StrikeWorks, I think that actually what the CIC offers to that is kind of a step before one goes to those sites, because they can come to CIC and work through their ideas. It's very similar, by the way. I mean, they could actually do all of the above, you know, where you could go to, you know, NASA or anywhere in the Department of Defense and get access to technology, you know, get a license to use certain technology.
To the patents and things.
Exactly. At, you know, for a whole lot cheaper than if they had to go out and create those capabilities on their own or pay kind of full commercial value, but they are from the government. So what it would allow these firms to do is to use the CIC as their testing ground. And then once they figured out that it does indeed work, they could go to, let's say, Spaceworks and participate either in, say, a one-step or a two-step process, or answer a challenge and be able to document, not just say, I think it would work like this. You know, we want to help them take it from a PowerPoint, you know, idea to, and actually look at what we've done, and it does work, and we can show you plenty of proof points and examples. Doesn't mean that it's perfect, but they're that much closer, and it buys down risk for even, you know, AFWorks or Spaceworks, StrikeWorks, MGM Works, all the different organizations like that across the Air Force, Space Force, DoD, for that matter.
Oh, that's amazing stuff. So, folks, you know, I'll make sure we'll put the links to the Riverside Research and CIC in both the YouTube and the LinkedIn postings so that you can access them quickly. But to kind of stay with Riverside Research for a few minutes longer, although we are getting into the bottom half of the hour, what do you see that is, another thing you'd mentioned to me previously, Dan, was kind of the unique model of investing in a solution and then providing it to the different DoD customers that Riverside Research has. I found that model really interesting and really a great deal for the taxpayer, frankly, because the funds that Riverside Research is getting, it's reinvesting in yet another solution for national security and national interest. So, can would you describe that as we talked about previously?
We call it our open innovation concept, and it is executed through our Open Innovation Center, which is a separate business unit at Riverside Research. And I think what I've seen is that it is very novel in that a lot of the work that goes on in the OIC, is what we call it, is funded actually through what I'll call excess revenue that we receive as as a reward for work we're doing on other types of contracts, and we take that that money and we make sure that our people are well compensated and have great benefits and that sort of thing, because we like to hold on to people. And then the other aspect of it is that we take far more of it and we look at a customer's problem. So let's say that we're a sub to somebody and we're on a contract and we see an issue that the government is having, and so the PM on that contract from the Riverside part of it might say to the customer and any of the partners, hey, we know we have this tough nut to crack. Let us take a look at it. So then what happens is we go through an internal process and we evaluate kind of a list of things that we would like to do additional research on, and we rack and stack those, and then we start, we self-fund it. And then when we come up with a solution or a prototype or something like that, we'll go back to our partners and government customer and say, hey, remember that problem? Well, now we've got this solution and it's yours. And of course, we're here to help you support it and do more if that's what you would like us to do. So this is pretty unique because it's a little bit different than maybe the model of where I'm going to invent something and then I'm going to go out and market it. And I'm not going to say that we don't do that, but fundamentally, the majority of our OIC work really is all about answering tough problems that the government can't get to, maybe because of budget restrictions. And so essentially, we're not only coming up with some solutions, but we're really buying down a lot of risk. So that if you're the government PM, you can go to your boss and say, hey, our team has looked at this problem, come up with a solution. We think, as a team, contractors and government, we really think we should take this on and take it to the next level to solve whatever our problem is.
That's a great initiative. And so you're doing that now. So I think it might be interesting to pivot a little bit to discussing specifically how you see supporting the Space Force and where you see the Space Force going in its interaction with research organizations. First, perhaps we can talk about the nonprofits, but also, given kind of your purview, which is rather wide, how you see them interacting with this ecosystem between these types of nonprofits, universities, drawing from other research labs, because there is no SFRL yet, right? The way there's an AFRL or an NRL, but maybe they'll pull some of that from AFRL and stand it up there. But how do you see that evolving, given your insight?
Yeah, so it's important to understand that there actually are what internally the Space Force refers to as space labs. And they are in AFRL. And what the commander of AFRL, the way that she explains it is it's one lab, two services. So at the Space Force level, the Space Force will say, look, you know, we have these science and technology requirements, S&T requirements. These are by order of priority, the things that we must have solved in the near term, midterm, and long term. And so they provide that input to Major General Heather Pringle, who then looks at her labs and you know, says, okay, this is what we're going to do, and they get funded for it. And so there are certain aspects of lab personnel where they actually, administratively, they belong to the Space Force, but operationally on a more day-to-day basis, they're working for AFRL. So, and it's a pretty good model because you're not really, you don't see the difference. I mean, you can't say, oh, well, you know, that's an Air Force thing, I'm not going to work on that because I'm part of the Space Lab. It doesn't really work like that because you got to have that synergy. And that's why the decision was made not to split off a Space Force research lab, because we didn't want to lose that inherent capability overall of the lab. And when you start looking at architectures and understanding where things sort of fit, that makes a lot more sense. Because, you know, when you start talking about hardening things, cyber, all of that, what applies to space is very likely going to apply to the air domain as well. So, but as far as there are some more delineated portions of the lab that I would say the majority of their time is going to go towards Space Force ventures, and that's going to include AFRL RV, which is space vehicles, mostly at Kirtland. And then there are going to be some aspects of the Sensors Directorate at Wright-Patt, the Propulsion Directorate, which is at Wright-Patt and Edwards Air Force Base, and even at the Munitions Directorate down at Eglin, and certainly at Rome Labs. You're going to at the you know, sort of the Information Directorate for AFRL, where they're going to be you know, providing substantial R&D input into the Space Force enterprise and the national security space enterprise, really, as a whole. And I know I'm leaving some aspects of the labs out that fit into that, but it's actually, it seems like so far it's working very well. You know, General Pringle understands both domains very well, and she and her team are doing a really great job of working with both industry and the field commands for Space Force and the major commands in the Air Force to make sure that in the end, the warfighter and the combatant commanders are getting what they need in order to ensure security of the United States.
So how do you see the Space Force then leveraging institutions like Riverside? Do you feel that it's a new paradigm, or do you feel, or do you see it as a continuation or an amplification of the things that have been working well in your interaction with the Air Force and the Army and others?
So I'm not going to say that they're looking at things in a new paradigm. What I would say is that the Space Force is going to try to fail faster and move faster. And where a company like Riverside comes in to the picture is we might have some ideas that we're fairly certain will work, and the Space Force could come to us and say, yeah, we like that. Let's let's try that out and make it work for us. So this is something that, in a recent meeting that I had with some senior leaders in Colorado Springs at Space Operations Command, I actually took them through our R&D portfolio. And in the beginning of the discussion, I kind of laid out, well, why am I talking R&D, to the Operations Command, right? And, my answer to that is always the commander doesn't know what the commander doesn't know. And so Brigadier General Kevin Whale, who's the Deputy Commanding General for Operations Transformation at the United States Space Force, it's his job to think about what are those S&T requirements that will make their way up to the space staff and then over to AFRL to make sure that this stuff gets done. Interesting note about General Whale, by the way. So Kevin Whale is a United States Space Force general officer, but he's also Royal Canadian Air Force.
Oh.
So he is not assigned to NORAD like most Canadians are. He intentionally was brought to the Space Force to shift and kind of rethink how we're going to do things to move the Space Force forward, which, when I found that out, I thought, wow, that is really amazing. And, when I asked him what he thought of some of the ideas, he kind of jokingly said, I'll take two of each. And obviously they can't do that. But I do think it, to answer your question, it really kind of brings up the fact that they're trying to look at new ways to do things.
Right.
Because that's how we're going to stay ahead. We're not, if we do things the same old way that we've done it over the decades, we're just going to barely keep up with our adversaries, let alone maintain space supremacy. And when I say that, I mean that in the best way possible, meaning that our industry and the industry of our allies and civil organizations like NASA, like European Space Agency, et cetera, have freedom of movement through the global space commons without having to worry about anybody potentially inhibiting them from that freedom of movement.
That's a really interesting point as well, in that. So what you're suggesting, and what it sounds like they're thinking of, is really how to accelerate that loop, rather than having things percolate through the research arm, and then kind of they're saying, let's cut out some of that path. Let's directly field this. Let's do some of that research testing and learning almost in the field, so that we get that learning faster. Like you said, fail fast. The other part, the part that goes with that fail fast is fail fast, learn fast, right? So fail fast, learn fast. Get to the end faster by throwing these things in. It's really fascinating because the community you and I come from, nuclear weapons, right, has not wanted to do that. Right? We don't. That's
for a lot of reasons, and because
right,
mission assurance and nuke surety and nuke safety is paramount, right?
Right. But applying that same mentality to every other area, which seems to have been done in some ways, probably is being rethought appropriately, and some of that is being pulled away because we don't need that same level of scrutiny of mission assurance of safety in every single thing, because the risk profiles are different.
Right. So, if it's just a matter of we're going to launch it and the sensor or the various algorithms don't work as well as we wanted them to, generally it's going to be a situation of, that we would characterize as no harm, no foul. I mean, it failed, but it didn't cost $1 billion to find out that it was going to fail.
Right.
And it didn't put anybody in danger. And worst case scenario is you'll deorbit, those satellites and they'll burn up coming in. And in the meantime, we've taken all of that data and all of that, the learnings that have generated out of that, so that we can try again, or try, slightly differently, but with hopefully a better result.
Fascinating. So, I mean, it's really exciting the way that it's being rethought, to the point of bringing in completely different perspectives with a general who's also part of, a different service, and bringing in, getting to that acceleration mentality. But, aside from your work with Riverside Research Institute, you are also a leader within the United States Space Force Association. And as we're kind of getting into the bottom of the hour here, I wanted to give you an opportunity to describe how that's being stood up, and what why it's so important, and what its role is going to be moving forward to ensure the success of the Space Force and its mission.
Right. So prior to the Space Force being, officially established, a number of people came together and said, hey, much like, let's take bombers and tankers, or the Association of Air Force Missileers, we need an association that's a little bit more narrowly focused on guardians and the industry that supports the Space Force mission. And so the idea to create the Space Force Association was launched, and it was founded by a guy, retired colonel by the name of Bill Wolf. His call sign is Hippie. And Hippie has done a lot of hard work putting this all together. And so since he established the Space Force Association, there's a couple areas where the association wanted to make sure that we were doing. And first and foremost is supporting the guardians from top to bottom, from the specialist one to the chief of space operations, and their families. And the goal is to ensure that they're able to do their mission and fight the fight that they're assigned according to the national security strategy. And then what we're doing also is we're doing research and taking deep dives into different areas to provide an level of academic rigor even to some of these areas. And we do this through our Space Force Journal, which isn't just about opinions, it's about actual research, some of it peer reviewed. And then finally, what we're doing largely is an outreach to help the population of the United States and even around the world to understand what is the Space Force, what does it do, what is Space Command, what does it do, and they are two different things with two different mission sets. And then finally, as part of that, we're offering scholarships to undergraduates who think that maybe they want to go serve in the Space Force. And by the way, that doesn't mean necessarily just in uniform. I'll maybe get to that a little bit more if we could discuss the Guardian ideal, but also for graduate researchers to help them financially pursue some studies that we think will benefit the Space Force and the national security space enterprise.
Oh, that's amazing. So, let's let's stay with that discussion, and maybe you can talk about the garden ideals. I think that's really critical to an understanding of where the Space Force is going, and how the association is going to support that.
Yes, so the Guardian Ideal is really the HR plan of the Space Force, but it's so much more than that, because it really lays out why the service is different and why the service, frankly, is necessary. And it's not just about, how we bring people in for the military uniform side, but it's also about how we bring people into the Space Force who are going to be civil servants, and even to some degree helping contractors understand maybe their role, or at least to have them be more empathetic to the civil guardians and military guardians as they do their mission. So some of the interesting things that that General Raymond, who's the Chief of Space Operations, would like to see happen is, for instance, let's take somebody like you, Z. You've got a lot of experience in space, and maybe you'd never thought about getting in uniform as a young person, or for whatever reason, and it just didn't work out. Well, they might take somebody like you and say, yeah, we'll take you. And by the way, we're not going to bring you in and make you a second lieutenant. You're going to come in and you're going to be, a lieutenant colonel or a colonel, or maybe even a general officer. And you don't have to come in necessarily and do 20 years. That could apply to a lieutenant, that could apply to, somebody we brought in as a colonel. And by the way, this isn't new. This happened during World War II, of course. And we still do it today with doctors and lawyers and specialists. So it's really no different when you think about people with rare skill sets that are needed to, make sure that the national security space enterprise operates flawlessly and provides the protection that it's required to do. So that's quite a bit different.
That is.
Yeah, and it's exciting. It really is exciting. And they're trying to work out how the reserve will work. And kind of one of the things that they would like to see happen is, so a lieutenant comes in, or a specialist comes in, so enlisted officer, and they do a 4-year assignment. Well, then they might get out, but maybe they don't get out all the way. So it's kind of a reserve thing, and they're still working through the details on how this would work out. But they go out and they get this great experience, working for a company. Maybe it's, one of the new space companies we were talking about earlier. But then they come back into the Space Force and they bring all that rich knowledge that they've gained with them, and some of that entrepreneurial and innovator spirit with them, to really help the Space Force go to the next level. So I think it's fantastic. Yeah, it's fantastic. Pat
Almost
McKay,
an extended sabbatical.
Definitely, yes. And Miss Patricia Mulcahy, who is the Chief Human Resources Officer of the Space Force, is leading the charge, along with Brigadier General Campbell, I think the name is, and then Jason Lamb, who made quite a stir back, not too long ago, at telling senior leaders in the Air Force that they weren't doing a great job of hiring, and those senior leaders did agree, but not without him, causing, like I said, kind of a
bit of a stir.
Yeah. So these are some really great people who are putting a lot of thought into this guardian ideal. And I think because, and you said something earlier, the Space Force is a lot smaller and it's a lot flatter. So it's not all of these layers of
Yes.
bureaucracy or whatever you want to call it to go through. And as a result of that, you know, what Lieutenant General Nina Armagno was saying at an event I was at was that she now sees Space Force captains or NCOs who are briefing them, you know, to the 3 and the 4-star level in a way that they never would have been able to do under the old paradigm. So a lot of information is making its way to the top, maybe with a little less filtration. I'm sure there's still some of that going on, but you know, we've had leaders over the past decade or so, from Marine Corps General Hoss Cartwright, who ran Strategic Command, who, you know, surprised me one time at 2 a.m. when I was on console, and he called and he wanted to know X, Y, and Z about a satellite. And I'm like, oh crap. Got this 4-star general. Said, give me a minute, sir. Put him on hold, called my boss. And my boss is like, hey, he operates differently. If you know the answer, tell him the answer. And I did. And then guys like General Hyten, who I don't know if he's retired or not, but if he hasn't, it's happening very soon.
Close.
Yeah, and he's the deputy, or I'm sorry, the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But he was also commander of Air Force Space Command. And, you know, he's been a huge advocate of fail fast and let's get stuff moving. And even for him, it was tough getting things moving, right? Because you're fighting a bureaucracy that doesn't necessarily want to do that. And that goes back to an ideal. We want to bring people in who understand that.
Right. I mean, it's an inertia. Any organization has an inertia, right? An object at rest tends to stay at rest.
Yeah.
You know, the laws of the universe. But
yeah.
But you know, it's clear that over the last 10 years, because people seem to think that this just happened in the last 3 and 4 years, but really it's been 10 years brewing. Right. I mean, you've outlined this longer than that, right? People, you know, this change, you know, but things are, you know, at some level, literally, you know, moving on orbit, moving on, you know, and moving on Earth too, in terms of, you know, getting the right relationships that you've outlined, you know, for us so well here, getting the right communication channels, in some cases, clearly bypassing a lot of communication channels that probably were not necessary. You know, to wrap up here, I'd love to ask you, what do you see and what are you excited about for the future, for the ecosystem, for Riverside, for the Space Force?
Well, I mean, I'm really hopeful that people who have great ideas will be able to be married up to people who understand the architectures, in that instead of saying, oh, we tried that 15 years ago, you know, technology may have improved since then. Yeah, right. That hopefully they'll be able to come together, work together, make things happen quicker, but not in a haste makes waste kind of way, but in a very real way that can ensure, you know, access and freedom to operate in those global space commons that I mentioned earlier. I think, I think companies like Riverside Research have a lot to add to that, but I don't want to take away from, you know, Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman or the big primes or the mediums or the small businesses, because I think everybody has certainly has a role to play. And then I'm super excited about the Space Force Association, which you can go to at ussfa.org and sign up to be a member, which we would like you to do, whether you're in or not, or just interested, join. So you can get access to a lot of really great interviews with senior leaders that you won't see anywhere else. And also an opportunity, you know, in your local area as we stand up chapters across the country to participate and see how maybe you could help the Space Force in a way that maybe you didn't think was possible before. So I'm excited about that. And I think most of all, I'm really excited about young people getting excited about space again. That's why I just cringe every time I hear somebody sort of bash, you know, the so-called space billionaires, you know, as they do rides, you know, these rides to space. Well, every time that happens, they're doing a couple things. They're inspiring people. They're gathering valuable data so that when they're launching important national security space payloads, that it's done right, it's done safely, because instead of just launching 10 or 20 times a year, they're launching, I don't know, could be, who knows, 100 times a year. And besides, you know, where can you go wrong launching Captain Kirk?
That's right.
In there, right? I mean, that was amazing. And every time I see a Blue Origin launch, it kind of blows my mind. I'm like, good grief. In 15 minutes, they went from being on the pad to going up, doing their thing. And by the way, there's R&D being done on those flights as well. It's just not being publicized.
It's not publicized, yeah.
Right. And then to watch, whether it's SpaceX or Blue Origin and others, you know, as they come along, land those things just blows my mind. And then, you know, in a new way, landing, you know, the actual capsules in a way that just wasn't done before, which is also amazing. And it makes me, you know, think about Ron Evans, who was on Apollo 17, and, you know, the amazing things he got to see with Harrison Schmitt on Apollo 17, and Gene Cernan. And
that's right.
You know, when they came back and how they splashed down, and to think about how we're doing things now, I just don't see, you know, I think that we're really moving quickly towards where people are going to be able to do so much more quickly, and hopefully more safely. And so, and Ron Evans is special because he's kind of a part of our family, my wife's family, I should say. He's the godfather to my sister-in-law, best friend to my father-in-law. And there's a new book about him is coming out in November. And if you just Google Ron Evans, you should be able to find that book. And he's an amazing, he was an amazing human being, passed away in his 50s, unfortunately. So he was lost really early. But I think when you ask the question, what's exciting coming up? Well, when we look back through the eyes of those pioneers to see, you know, where we are now is amazing, and where we could go is even more amazing. So I'm excited about being a part of Riverside. I'm excited about being a part of the Space Force Association, and I'm super excited for all of our guardians who are going to do great things that we never even thought possible even 10 years ago.
That's spectacular. Thank you so much, Dan. Again, folks, Dan Mosqueda of Riverside Research Organization, Riverside Research. You know, and we'll provide the links to Riverside Research's center Innovation Center, as well as the United States Space Force. That book about Ron Evans is A Long Voyage to the Moon, The Life of Naval Aviator and Apollo 17 Astronaut, Ron Evans, by Jeffrey Bowman. It's just about, I believe it was released today. I think
okay.
I saw an article about the release today.
Yeah.
October 18th. So, you know, it's really a remarkable evolution you've cataloged for us, Dan. Thank you again so very much. Thank you again to our sponsors, Millennium Space Systems, and past sponsors, Viasats, the Space Foundation, and others. You know, folks, this is another great conversation that we've had. Thanks, Dan, so much. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you know, let us know what you think. Let us know who you'd like us to talk to, and what topics you'd like to see. But for now,
don't forget to like the video.
That's right. Don't forget to like the video.
Yeah,
Thanks, Dan.
that's important.
It is. Take care, everyone. Cheers.